Okay, this is Math Review 4-1. We're going to start with the distributive property. If you remember anything about the distributive property, then you know that this letter B on the outside is separated with the parentheses from the A and the Y. So that little separation with the parentheses means that we're going to have to multiply. And then we also have an addition symbol in there. So we have the distributive property, starts with the letter D. Distribute means, that should give you the little clue, starts with the letter D, that we have double operations. We have multiply and add. We have two things that we have to do. Okay, so distributive property, double, multiply, and add. Next, when we distribute the letter B to the A, that means we're going to end up with multiplication of B times A. But we also have an addition symbol, so we can't stop there. We have to continue writing the addition symbol. And now we have to distribute the B to the Y. So we end up having B times Y. So in other words, the question was asking us to use the distributive property to write an equivalent. An equivalent means equals. So now we have an equals, an equivalent expression. And the expression is this one, B times A plus B times Y. That's an expression. So the key idea for this problem is going to be use the rainbow. And the rainbow that I'm referring to are the little arrows that we draw on the top. Okay, that's the strategy. Number two. For number two, we have the integer operations. We're going to add, subtract, multiply, and divide the integers. The first thing that we have is add. If you remember, the strategy for adding two integers, a positive and a negative, is the strategy of teams. So that means that if you remember the strategy of teams, we draw like a big T, that's your T chart, that's your scoreboard, where that little big T is like the letter T for teams. So that's your way to remember what strategy we use. And also looks like a big plus sign. So we're going to put the positives versus the negatives. So the positive team has 5 goals or 5 soldiers, however you want to look at it. And the negative team has 14. So 14 goes on this side. So now we ask the question, if this is the end of the game, the scoreboard is positive versus negatives, it's 5 goals against 14 goals. It's obvious that the negative team won, and they won by the difference of 14 and 5. So they didn't win by 14 goals, they won only by 9 goals, because you have to take the difference, okay? So that's the answer for add. The next one, subtract. For subtracting, it's going to be change the sign, add a line, because subtraction doesn't exist, right? So if subtraction doesn't exist, that means that we are going to do that. Change the sign. It was a subtraction, -5 minus a -3. So we're going to change the minus to a plus, and then we're going to add a line. So instead of a -3, now we're going to add a line. We're going to do this, and we're going to add the line this way. So now you can probably see that we just woke up Sleeping Man. In this case, the Sleeping Man was there, so we woke him up. And that's just a little way of saying, hey, there's 2 minus or a minus and a negative next to each other. We're going to turn it into an adding of the opposite of the 3, which is a positive 3 in this case. So now we're going to add. And because we're adding, now we go back to the first strategy of doing the T chart, the teams strategy. So positives versus negatives. There's 5 negatives. There's 3 positives. So obviously the negatives are going to win because they have more goals. So they win by 2 goals. Now for multiplication, when you multiply, you're going to have to remember the strategy of transfer. When you multiply or you divide. And what are we transferring? We're transferring any negative signs. So in this case, we're going to multiply 2 times 4, which is just 8. But now we're going to transfer the negative signs. That negative sign makes the 8 a -8. But the second negative sign that we have on our problem gets transferred to the answer as well, and we make it a +8. So my final answer is just +8. To divide, we're going to also divide. Remember that fraction line right there means division, so that looks like a division symbol. So 21 divided by 3 is just going to be a 7. And if we have a negative sign, we're going to end up transferring it to the answer. So we end up with -7. And that's it. So the key idea for any integer operation is to remember, of course, the correct strategy and use the correct strategy. For adding is teams. For subtracting doesn't exist. So we change the sign, add a line. And those are the three strategies that you need to have on your paper. Teams, change the sign, add a line, and transfer the negative sign for multiply and divide. And then the last question that we have is the order of operations. For the order of operations, we have to have a strategy. And that strategy is the PEMDAS strategy, where you have to write it like this. This is going to be part of your math review expectations. You have to have it every time. And you have to include those two arrows that I'm drawing right now. Those two arrows are important because they tell us that multiplication and division have to be done in order from left to right. Same thing for addition and subtraction. So now we're going to start with parentheses. And we do have parentheses. We have parentheses grouping the operation of 2 plus 1. So we have to do that first. So 2 plus 1 is going to give us 3. And then the next step is to copy everything else down. So it's going to look like this. Times 6 divided by, and now we have a negative 9. Notice that those parentheses are not really parentheses. There's nothing to do inside the parentheses. They're just grouping the negative symbol with the 9 together so that you know that that's a negative 9. So now that we know that, we're going to go to the exponents, but we don't have any exponents. We don't have any of those little bitty numbers. So then we go to multiplication or division from left to right. And in this case, we have this multiplication first on the left. So we have to do that. So 3 times 6 is going to be 18. And then when you copy the next step down, which is divided by negative 9, all we have to do is divide 18 by 9, and we end up with 2. But if you remember the strategy from the second problem of transferring the negative sign, we end up with a negative 2. So my final answer is negative 2. And the key idea for this problem is going to be the little saying that we remember for PEMDAS, which is please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. And remember that each letter stands for parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, and add and subtract.